Once again, we'll be out in the weeds this week. Just kidding. We're going to talk about medical marijuana. Leader Echols, good to see you. Representative Dunnington. State Board of Health reverses course, as the Attorney General said they should. They took back the pharmacist recommendation, a requirement, and they took away you can't smoke medical marijuana. Your thoughts about the State Board of Health doing what they did?
Yeah, this question has been so unnecessarily hard to figure out. It's been all the way back to legislative session when the legislature could have passed something but didn't pass something. It was the people coming to vote in June and passing something, believing that they were going to have medical marijuana as an option, only to have the State Board of Health reverse that course, only to have the State Board of Health and the governor come back and re-reverse what they reversed. This whole thing has been way too confusing. It needs to get settled. It needs to get settled now. I was happy to see that the Board of Health reversed their original decision. That decision and the governor's to add the unnecessary requirements was a disaster. I'm glad to see that part taken away.
I hope you're following me on Twitter at Mitchell Talks, because this week one of our reviewers reminded me of a tweet from February, and it was Representative Jordan was coming on, and he was saying, you know, we're going to need to do something about State Question 788 if it passes. All right, now you look back on that and you go, wow, a lot of this could have been taken care of. We know that something didn't happen, which was on the Senate side. But that happened. Here we are today. The Board of Health reverses itself. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so to be clear for the viewers at home, the House did pass a bipartisan and agreed bill. Representative J.P. Jordan did a great job bringing people together. We wish that would have passed. It would have solved a lot of problems, but it didn't, so here we are. One of the problems with the new Department of Health regulations is they went from one extreme to another. First, they were far too stringent in the way they did things. Now it's 20 pages of total regulations. There's almost no testing requirements. The labeling is woefully inadequate. And this is something that kind of all sides agree, both the pro-788 and the anti-788. It is really what happened in the Department of Health is we went from one extreme to another. And there's still a few problems with the way they regulate things in those. It hasn't been good.
All right, well, enough about the State Department of Health. We've talked about that for a year, and we know what that is. So, the hot potato. It looks like it's back in your lap and your lap.
Well, we think it absolutely is. And I should have, by the way, distinguished between the Board of Health and the hardworking men and women in the Department of Health who are doing a great job as the Board of Health. And what is probably going to happen is this legislative committee, we've had our second meeting. It was an excellent meeting. We had 3 groups that all were for 788, and we really saw that while there's some disagreements now, they have a lot more unity than they do disagreements. And there was a big push by myself to have them focus on that unity, which I think they're doing. The legislature is moving forward, trying to come up with an agreed bill. It's important if we go into special session, we continue to be as open and transparent as we've been with the bill laid out ahead of time so the citizens know what it is we're doing, and we're working through that process.
It's interesting. In this particular issue, the legislature really is getting high grades because, first of all, there hasn't been a fist fight breakout or a fire or anything like that. With the legislative handling of this, are you confident that this panel and the legislature can get this right?
Well, the fact is this has always been our problem to deal with. Back 6-8 years ago, House Democrats, Senate Democrats brought up bills in the legislature in order to pass medical marijuana. Those were never even taken up, never heard, and it got pushed out to the people in order to pass something because the legislature couldn't get it done. Fast forward to this year, again, we have an opportunity to pass something. The House does its job and passes something, sends it over to the Senate, and we get nowhere, and here we are wondering whose fault it is and wondering whose job it is to fix it. It's always been the legislature's job to fix it. It's time to get it fixed now, and it needs to be done before elections in November.
Okay, we talked about education a lot in the early part of the legislative session. This week, the governor is placing a state question on the ballot, State Question 801. All of a sudden on Oklahoma Ed on Twitter, again, on Twitter, there's where all the news is, the education crowd is very unhappy with this State Question 801. For those who are just hearing about it, what is it? What does it do? Why is it important?
Yeah, State Question 801 was something that the legislature passed in order to put on the ballot in November. And quite frankly, again, this November, we're going to have so many state questions on the ballot, and it's getting ridiculous. At some point, voters have to believe that the legislature that they elect should go to the Capitol and do their job instead of go to the Capitol and file and pass state questions to put back out for the people to decide. So that's frustrating as it is, but what State Question 801 does is it could raise your property tax in order to use new money to pay teachers locally instead of use that bond money to pay for repairs, replacements, and new buildings. It's always only been used for building fund. Now, State Question 801 would change the Constitution to allow local districts to use that for teachers.
And get that in a soundbite. So it's an important issue, but it is way out in the weeds.
Well, it's definitely out in the weeds, and to be clear, State Question 801 would not raise your property taxes. It would allow an individual district to have the ability to have flexibility with where they spend their property tax money. They could spend it on many other things, and it would allow some additional mills if an individual district, through a supermajority vote, were to decide they were going to do that. And frankly, I don't have a problem with letting the people decide. There are pluses and minuses to this issue. There are some that are going to say it benefits rich districts at the expense of poor districts. But I believe the citizens get their votes right. I believe the voters know best. And I don't believe there's anything wrong with giving the voters the chance and the opportunity to decide, do they want to have that flexibility? And then I believe the legislature needs to respond. If they want that, then let's make it easy for them. If they don't, let's continue down the path that we've already done with historic increases to education funding. Nobody's talking about stopping that.
That's correct. All right, this last one, Grant Herms did a story this week. The media's been talking about an audit by the State Auditor Inspector of Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's not a good audit. But there's three things that bother me. Number one is it's an audit that took 4 or 5 years. It's an audit that comes out 3 weeks before the auditor's hand-picked choice is in a runoff for the GOP nomination. Both of those are troubling, but the worst part of it is we're still talking about the Department of Veterans Affairs still being bad and mistreating veterans. This is a story that's got multiple layers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the very worst part about this story is our veterans deserve better. That's the worst part about this story. This had just abuse after abuse after abuse in our facilities that exist to take care of those that took care of us. And it's disgusting, and it needs to stop. It talks about veterans not being able to be seen by physicians, staffing levels being too low, not having proper meal plans. It really is terrible. But the two other problems to look at, when you're talking about continuing to fund things like education, audits like this don't help, showing misspending in government. We need to root that out. But it also, on the audit side, there was a lot of talk about how the House passed an independent audit panel, and then that was passed by the Senate, which has started some of these audits. 3 years to complete an audit of the Department of Veteran Affairs is way too long. That can't happen. That's too long.
Lots and lots of questions.
Lots of veterans were hurt during that time period.
And this is a firm grasp of the obvious. Let me remind viewers, this is not a new issue. We have Alex Cameron here, Scott Carter, Bob Sands. They did the story on Veterans Affairs in 2012. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. So an audit coming out 3 weeks before an election raises questions, but also, as he just said, this raises questions about what are we doing on veterans?
Yeah, this issue is really about two main things. And those two things are, how do we treat veterans in the state of Oklahoma, and trust in your government. And quite frankly, we haven't done our job in treating our veterans, those who deserve the best treatment in our state, with respect that they deserve, and that needs to change. And second of all, when it comes to issues of trust, this audit once again shows that the government that has been elected, that has been in power for the last decade, has time and time again shown that trust is an issue. And we're about to go into another election cycle. There are big issues at hand: education, what we're going to do with marijuana. Trust has got to be rebuilt with the public and their legislatures, and if they can't have it, then they need to send new people.
Thanks, gentlemen. We'll do this again next week. Meantime, you can see this again at news9.com/yourvotecounts. Follow me on Twitter @MitchellTalks.